Oh, let's talk about being a man today. Well, actually, better yet, let's talk about masculinity, redefining masculinity. Do men of today understand what that means? And what are the conversations we're having about that? Well, today, my special guest, who I'm extremely thrilled to have her on our program today, and I feel it's a timely conversation. We as men and women today have been questioning, what is masculinity? Where has it gone? Where is it now? Where does it stand? Well, our guest today, Jennifer Jehl, is a masculinity coach, a redefining men, kingmaker. She is also the CEO of Jehl LLC. And we're going to be talking to her today about masculinity and what that means. Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on to Make Us Bar, where we are looking to create 1 million leaders today for tomorrow. We really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
I love it. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. I just can't tell you enough about how I've been looking forward to our engaging conversation.
Same. Absolutely. I'm very excited.
Jennifer, masculinity, before we get into that, what is masculinity to Jennifer?
What a layered question. So I have a Kingmaker code that is comprised of 13 different traits, which I think really embody masculinity back to the biblical level. And I can definitely go over those. But I think masculinity in itself is, I'm going to use one word that I like recently, and it's a word that has a lot of misunderstanding. People see it the wrong way. So I'm going to use the word meekness. Okay. People think it means weakness, and it's totally not. Going to go back to Jesus. He was the most meek person of all time. He was strong. He was like a lion and also like a lamb at the same time. He had self-control. He had boldness, assertiveness. He had a sense of dangerousness that was sheathed. And I think that is ultimately what defines masculinity. Lion, lamb, dangerousness, sheathed.
I couldn't have capsulized it better, and I really appreciate that definition of that. So before we delve too much into that, tell us who Jennifer Jehl is. What brought you along this journey? Where do you hail from? Tell us about your journey.
Yeah, so I have a bit of a hard journey. I was a toxic people pleaser, so that's what I've kind of labeled my past self as, even though I think it's kind of like alcoholism. Once you're a certain way, you kind of have to have a daily intention of not being that way. So I consider myself always a people pleaser. But so I started a very bad pattern back in high school of bad relationships, bad business decisions. I truly did not know who I was, my identity, my value, my worth, my authenticity. I defined myself by whatever guy I was with starting in 10th grade. I defined myself by many things that weren't actually me. And I said yes to things I should never have said yes to, no to things that I should have said yes to. And it just took me down a really, really unfortunate path. And ultimately, I did hit a rock bottom. I was always a good person. Like, it was more like I saw such good in people, and I wanted to give everybody just the most benefit of doubt possible. And I was a saver as well. And this just a recipe for disaster at times, you know? So eventually I hit a rock bottom. I was in a relationship that I ended, I would say 5.5 years ago now. This person was abusive, financially, verbally, physically, in all of the ways. And it's kind of started going into my family. I have 3 children. I have a special needs little boy, and he was he was on the receiving end of some of this verbal abuse. And I started getting really scared. I knew that I had to go, but I didn't know how to do it. And thankfully, my girls were not bothered by any of this. My parents were definitely affected by this as well. It was just a mess. And one day, my little boy was hit in the head, and I took that as a catalyst for change. I immediately
Please, Jennifer, hit in the head
by this person, yeah. And I was horrified, like absolutely horrified, ashamed, guilt, like. But I knew I had to leave immediately. So literally the next day, we ran away in the night to where my parents lived at the time, and I started a new life. I committed to therapy, all kinds of mentorship, deep into the Word of God, all of these things that I knew for a fact would change my life, time management, discovering really who I was from the inside out. And I became so bold and assertive in myself. It did take me a long time to heal. Like, I'm not going to downplay that whatsoever. But after about a year, give or take, maybe a little bit more, I felt healed. I felt strong. I felt like I knew who I was. I felt that I could forgive this person and move on. And I did. And that was very freeing. And I've never looked back. And so along that journey, I started writing inspirational pieces and put them out publicly on social media. They were more therapeutic for me than for any other reason. And eventually people started liking them, and, moving on down the line, like I heard things like, oh, you should become a coach. You should do this. You should do this. And so I kind of got into that world. I originally wanted to coach the type of woman that I was, kind of like a driven people pleaser. That can't say no. And for whatever reason, that didn't work. I think God was calling me to something very different. I started working with my first male client before I got into this passion for masculinity. And that went really, really well. I had the best experience. And then I kind of just, as I got deeper into the Word of God, I realized that the world needs masculine men. Okay. And my experience with men, besides my father, was terrible. And every single man in the world has the ability to become the best man, the best version of themselves, just like we do as women, right? Like, we're not perfect either. But men, the world needs strong men more so than anything, because a strong, healthy man is able to create a healthy family, a healthy marriage, a healthy community, a healthy school system. Like, all of these things, I think at the start of, forgive me for saying this, I think the start of feminism, even though it had really good intentions, was kind of the downfall of masculinity, true traditional masculinity. Kind of shoved it in the face, and it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And maybe now things are starting to turn around. I hope so. But I think my experience with men, knowing that we need strong men, and seeing even the experience that my 2 teen daughters have with their own father, who has not been present in raising them. You can see the difference in them compared to other teen girls. I think that, plus the Word of God and how we were created as men and women, just really, really created this sense of passion in exploring masculinity and empowering men to become that real masculine version of themselves that they were created to be by God.
So when you say the masculine man, and you listed some of those things, what did that mean? Masculine.
So, like I mentioned before in my Kingmaker code, I think certain traits that I take from stories in the Bible and from what Jesus teaches and what God teaches in the Old Testament, I think 3 main traits are very important to masculinity. Those would be self-control, discipline, and honor and respect. And then I have some sub-traits like leadership, emotional vulnerability, and emotional intelligence. That's something that is very controversial these days, that, maybe half and half people, men especially, think they should be emotionally vulnerable. Some people think they should only be very, very stoic. And so there's a lot of controversy there. Faith, love, growth, competence, assertiveness, responsibility, protection and provision, strength and courage. All of these things, I think, really give you an illustrative view of masculinity.
I think that's quite clear, actually. Thank you for that. And so it's those character traits, those are the full combination. When we say masculine, that's what we would think of masculine.
Yes, yes.
So now, so it does bring this question, Jennifer. How can and there's no apologies here in my show, but so I want you to feel comfortable. I'm going to say, how does a woman teach a man about masculinity?
Right. Which, of course, is a question I get often, either in a negative way or not. I think it's a very valid question to be asked. I don't teach men how to be men. I want to be very clear about that. I cannot do that as a woman. I rather empower them to take everything in their life, recreate a vision based on these traits, and how they can apply them operationally to their life, their marriage, their professional life, their finances, all of these things. So it's like the masculine traits play into vision, purpose, ethos, and we create, intentions, goals, like very specific to their life. So I don't teach them how to be men. I empower them to use what they were already created with in actionable, tangible ways.
So a way of cultivating what you believe is already innate, God-given.
Yes.
You help them to recognize again where this has already been lying inside, and here's how you bring it back out. Am I correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because also, if you think about it, the way society has portrayed men, like I said, maybe it's getting a little bit better now because there's more awareness, but the way society has portrayed men in the last 20 to 50 years, arguably, is not very pretty. And I think it takes men are afraid to be their true self. They're confused about what it is, or they've been shushed, right? Like we were talking about earlier before the show started. Some men are afraid to even open a door for a woman anymore.
Yes.
It's gotten to that level. So empowering them to know that these things are good and God-given and to use them.
I can't tell you, talking about the door opening, we did speak about that pre-show. I myself had one of those situations, and I got to tell you, it blew me away, Jennifer. So easily, this had to be about maybe 15, 16 years ago. Okay. And I opened up the door. It is my habit. It is a part of where I feel my personage does justice by the way my dad raised me. I held the door open for a woman going into the store. He said, "You don't need to open up the door for me. I can open up my own door." And right. I had guest encountered here and there tiffs as far as opening up the door, but generally it had been warmly received. But she wanted to make a point. She's empowered. She's a woman. Hear me roar. I don't need no man to open the door. And it took me back saying, how did we get to this place? How do we get to the place where just a man being kind, who sees a woman who's not after her to make hits at her or anything, just open the door because he felt that was the right thing to do. So Jennifer, in your summation, how did we get to this point where that became a bad thing for a man, not just to open up the door, but that symbolism of those historic traits?
Right. And so again, I think it truly did start with feminism, but then, and like I said, I think the intentions of feminism originally were very, very great. Like I am a woman, hear me roar. Like that's me for sure. However, I think there is a fine line. I think, especially like when you think of a marriage, for instance, there's a fine line between being that woman out in, professional life or whatever it may be, but then you should be able to come home, and this is where you then become more of your feminine self. You have to have the masculine traits in the professional world. Everybody does. But to be able to let go of that to the person you're with, I think that's really important. Also, I think that we have been trained as women from our experiences and traumas, and maybe from men's own confusion about what a man is and how it's gotten just redefined and redefined and redefined over time. We've been trained to become very masculine ourselves. And so to recognize that and then go back to the roots, I think is what needs to happen.
When you say we've been trained to be masculine ourselves, I think some of the recent conversations I've also heard from guys is, well, she's more masculine than me. And just that statement in itself, I find fascinating. Have you experienced some of that dialogue yourself with female companions or colleagues?
I have, and I actually used to be that way. In my healing process after that rock bottom, I would say that at that year mark where I felt good and I knew who I was, I actually did become overly masculine in a sense of I can take care of myself. I became very defensive. And I think it was still part of my healing journey. But I think, yeah, we are women, I think in general, are very offended easily. We want to take care of ourselves. We want people to know that we can take care of ourselves, but really that's exhausting and it's not sustainable. And a man is supposed to be an emotional safe spot. He's supposed to be a secure spot for us. There's a dynamic that we were created with by God that is the only way I think a healthy, flourishing person can be part of a relationship, if that makes sense.
It does. Now, a curious question for me that you brought up, an interesting a triggered thought. In going back to masculinity, is there also a re-examination of femininity to where in your work that you do, that bridges the gap where now I've come to you, I'm John Doe, you've assisted me for 2 years in working through my masculinity. Now I encounter a woman I want to engage with. Is there something in the work of women seeing their femininity being less masculine in its energy where you can converse about, where you would see, okay, here's how women on their part can build this bridge, or Jehl LLC, here's how we help them bridge that gap, because the messages have been such a chaotic dialogue the last few years. So where do women fit in that picture to bridge that gap? Right. Or femininity, femininity, which is also what we touched on, has been redefined to a great deal, as we mentioned.
Yeah, it has been redefined as well as masculinity. I think while I don't work with women, I would love to eventually start doing that to then, like I said, help create better communication in marriages. I think it's definitely a requirement for a healthy marriage for the woman to go back to those roots, like I said, those feminine roots, which are the more nurturing. If you think about the Proverbs 31 woman, right? Every man wants that woman, but she's not a pushover, by the way. She actually has business sense and all kinds of good things. Like she supports, she encourages, she wants her husband to be the absolute best he can be. And she wants him to guide her and lead the family. But you have to let go and let your walls down as a woman in order for that to be allowed, because it just doesn't work. And so many women are fighting that. And so the dynamic of a marriage these days is very hard to get to that place because it's a two-way street.
That's very much so. I'm thinking, so John Doe is saying, I've been hearing incredible conversations. I need to explore this whole thing about my own masculinity. Let me find this place. So they find Jehl LLC. He contacts you. Take us from that point to his graduation point, so to speak.
Yeah. So everybody does come to me with their own focus or priority, which takes precedence. But essentially what I do with everybody is we redefine his vision across all areas of life. So anywhere from professionally, relationally, financially, spiritually is a big part of this as well, emotionally, mentally, with regard to legacy, free time, community impact, physical health, nutritional health. We talk about everything, and we kind of determine what the next level is with all of those things, as well as maybe a little bit further out. And then we do the same thing with operationalizing these masculine traits. So we kind of redefine and assess what things are currently, and then we create action steps, processes, intentions, goals, all of these things to make them achievable. kind of like SMART goals for every single thing we're talking about. And then those become the guidelines and principles and values, ways of communication, as we go through daily life together as well. So we're not just going through some curriculum together, because that's not fun and that's not organic. We are using these tools that we come up with specific to his life only, and we are playing them out as his daily life occurs. So
now, sorry, please forgive me.
No, that's
continue.
it. No, go ahead.
So in college, high school, we have 4 years. You get a graduation certificate. PhD program, you have to work on it until you complete all of your necessary requirements for it.
Right.
Is it, in this particular area, is there a graduation point? John Doe comes in, you're working with him, you've gone over this. Is it 2 years, 3 years, 7 years, where your company will work with them with a specific time frame in mind? Or is it that he tells you, or you recognize, hey, this is a place where I see that you've made all these goals? How is it defined that they've graduated to that point?
Right. So I think what I typically recommend, and this is the way it does play out in most cases, unless the client really, really wants to go further, I like to cap it at 6 months. And the reason why is, first of all, I think, not a downplay on coaches by any means, because I am one, but I think so many coaches try to get you to stay forever, kind of like a therapist would. Like, you just kind of keep going and there's no end date, and then it becomes at some point counterproductive. And so 6 months, I think, is a sweet spot. It gives us a lot of time to work. It gives us a lot of skin in the game, and a far enough out end date to make it not seem so far out that it's not attainable. And I think by the time 6 months comes around, they have the tools that they need and the new approaches to life to keep going and growing and keep defining new levels. I think that life is kind of like a video game. Like, imagine yourself playing my favorite game, like Mario, because I'm so old school.
Same here, Jennifer. We're the same way. I still think about Donkey Kong.
I love it. Those were so good. But if you imagine, like, you want to be stuck on level 1 of Mario World for the rest of your life, no, you keep defining new levels, and there's no end game. Like, there's no end of the game. You don't win the game. And so that's what I hope that they continue to do once they leave me.
So after 6 months, do you get a graduation certificate? And I'm being a little facetious, but just to explain the process, do you get a certificate that says you are now masculine?
Yes. Yes.
So
no, but seriously, I think
we're just teasing. Yeah.
Yeah. All these men, every man is masculine. Every man has it in them. Words like toxic masculinity have been thrown around, which I don't believe in. Like, there's toxic femininity as well, right? Like, they're just toxic people. There's no toxic. And toxic traits, by the way, of masculinity, which maybe some people think are true masculine traits, those are the more weak traits, like impulsivity, hedonistic behavior that's just like for the purpose of quick satisfaction. It's kind of like, you can either take it as the complete pushover guy, or the guy who goes into a school and shoots up the school. Like, those are two types of extremes on the toxic side of any person. Like, you can be too weak and too pushover. Like, nice guys do finish last, I will say.
Now, so wait, you brought up a very good point, Jennifer. So a nice guy can't be masculine?
I think a kind guy is masculine. Nice guy.
Let's pause there for a second.
Okay.
I like how you said that. And I don't think there's enough time spent on that difference. So a kind guy can be masculine, but a nice guy, let's elaborate on that a little. So
I think a nice guy is your people pleaser, pushover. He doesn't know himself. He's insecure. He probably doesn't make the best decisions, but he's really, really, really nice. People
Wait,
like him.
guys hate that when a woman says, "Oh, he's really, really nice."
I know, that's like the worst. It's like it's a nice compliment, but it becomes the worst compliment.
It does. It really does. I'm glad you brought that up because it's exactly that. So please continue.
Yeah, and so nice guys have no boundaries, right? Like, but kind guys, now they are still kind, like nice. They do good things. They treat people well, but they have boundaries and standards and a code and ways in which they don't allow themselves to be treated. And they have core values that show through in the way they live. They have boundaries. They command respect kindly. You know to respect a kind person. Just like, I mean, I say that about a woman too. Like there's a vast difference between nice and kind. So I would
Now,
encourage all men listening to this to determine what that kind of looks like in your life. And if you think, or if you've been told that you're a nice guy, try to figure out how to be a kind guy.
well, I have to admit, I've been called a nice guy in my younger years.
Okay.
And just like a bunch of the brothers I know, we don't like when women say, "Oh, you're so nice, Seth." You're so nice. And I used to say, I don't want you to think I'm nice. I want you to think I'm a gentleman, maybe. But nice is just, that tells me when a woman's communicating that language, that means you're nice enough, stay that distance. I'm going to look over here.
Yes,
And
exactly.
then she looks at the bad guy. So what happens there, Jennifer? Explain what is going on with that. So they say the
Right.
nice guy, and they do finish last. You got. I've learned to be kind and not so nice. So what happens when she told the nice guys, "You're nice," but she goes for the bad boy that's riding the motorcycle, and he says, "Get over here." And how
Yeah.
does that work? Yeah.
Well, I think it's the more, even though it's not the better choice per se, because maybe neither of them are, it's the more attractive choice because at least that guy has a fake kind of confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but eventually that doesn't work out. As we all know, the bad boy doesn't work out in the long run.
Yeah.
Um, the kind guy who does have, maybe the kind guy rides a motorcycle too, like, but he has really good qualities and he has boundaries and he leads well without being egotistical and commanding, and he leads from a place of empowerment and not a place of power.
You mentioned empowerment. I find that very interesting also because empowerment, how does a mom and a dad in today's time, I'm sorry, they have a male child. So from the beginning, how do they begin the process to raise a masculine person?
Well, I think it all goes back to how you should be in a biblical marriage, which even if you're not religious, those principles still work in your life 100%, I guarantee. It's modeling behavior. So you're modeling the traits of a good husband and you're modeling the traits of a good wife and that dynamic. And, I could get into this whole thing about women submitting to their husband, which I totally believe in, and people also have that wrong. I think if a man is fully submitted to his purpose and his mission and to God, if they do believe in God, how can the woman go wrong by then following his leadership and submitting to his leadership? So he is leading, he's being led by something higher that is good. As long as it's good, the woman should feel secure enough to follow him, and then the kids follow suit, and that's the way it's supposed to be, I think. Again, the man is still coming from a place of empowerment and encouragement and motivation, and leading his family to good places. If that answers the question at all, I think.
It
But
does.
modeling that behavior, and there's a reason they say that the marriage is the most important. Like the marriage should be priority over the children for a reason.
Absolutely. I definitely understand that. I'm also, if you had to think of examples, and these are loosely based, not to build your whole organization or company on, but just some examples that people might look at and they can say, okay, I get it. He was masculine historically. That's an example. And it doesn't mean this person didn't have bad things happen in their life or do wrong things, but the example of a masculine man where we might recognize that. So we mentioned Jesus for sure. who else might you give as an example that some people can have as a reference point?
Jesus is the ultimate example because he does display every single trait of masculinity that I described in many different ways. That he was gentle, he was very strong, he was very assertive, he was very emotionally intelligent, and he had a sense of meekness where he was literally being tortured to death, and he could have killed everyone in front of him, and he chose not to follow his purpose. So purpose, again, is this underlying mission. I think all men need a mission, right? I think purpose is very, very important for a man to have. Without purpose, he becomes depressed and lost. So one of my other favorite examples in the Bible, I think a lot of men are struggling with this, and they feel like they're lost and they don't know what their purpose is. So I always like to tell them a story of Abraham. Abraham did not find his purpose until he was in his 70s. And he was living a great life, like a wealthy guy living in comfort. Like he was highly respected in his town, and God called him on this adventure, and he had to leave his wealth. He had to leave his comfort, and he took his wife, and, he was promised to leave this huge legacy, as we know. But if you think about it, like, how would he know that would actually come true? That would be a very, very scary thing. I think it's just a good reminder, based on how he did turn out with this massive legacy. It's just a good reminder that purpose and strength through finding that, feeling if you're pulled towards a calling or a mission that's probably going to be really scary, like 100% it's going to be scary, and maybe something that takes you well outside of your comfort zone, it's 100% guarantee that you should probably follow that. And unfortunately, most of us don't. But he's like my favorite person in the Bible, I think, as far as
Jesus and then Abraham.
Yeah, I love Jesus is obviously my choice, but yeah, I love Abraham and his story of purpose.
I didn't hear you mention this, and I'm not sure it was with reason or not, but I'm curious. A masculine man is also very loving, correct or no? Is a masculine man, and now, are there specific traits of his actions of love that make it less masculine or more? Or is there a way that you can explore that as a conversational piece?
Can you be more specific? Are you talking about like hugs
Sure.
and kisses, or are you talking about?
Actually, I can give you a great example.
Okay.
My dad, we kind of mentioned my dad a little bit ago, Lawford Baxter. He was the example of masculinity for me. And then my father-in-law, Sheldon Zelenko, Pops. Now, they were different sides of the same coin. So my dad, he was a full sports guy, did football, boxing, all the sports you name, military, World War II, etc. But for his kids, he always kissed us on the forehead. The boys were sweetheart, the girls were sweetheart. It was son or daughter and sweetheart. And he had no problem showing and demonstrating his love in an affectionate way. But he was if we had to say, like a John Wayne type, just for the extreme example on that. And I know everyone won't agree with that, but we don't know John Wayne, but just what has been perceived in that sense. Yeah. He was a Renaissance man in that way. But I remember my brothers and sisters and I, we always could know dad was going to give us a kiss on the forehead, or we're going to be, come here, sweetheart, come here, son. So he was not afraid that his lovingness would be mistaken for weakness.
Yes.
That's the same way I think about with Jesus. Jesus had a great deal of love. Now, my pops, my father-in-law, he was the extreme opposite. He was definitely a gruff Brooklyn guy. And when I first said I want to get married to his daughter, he said, F no. And he was like, working on his cars, the whole thing. So he was not genteel as my dad. But I never doubted my father-in-law's love. And I, being after my dad, would say to Pops, because he was just definitely not one that would kiss you on the forehead or anything, but he showed you his love through his conversation or his words of advice. And he was loving in the sense, I'm there for you, right? He had the Brooklyn accent. Hey, your putts. Yeah. I'm going to take you to the store. You're going to get the stuff for the kids. And his demonstration of love, that was my best impression of my father-in-law, just so you know.
Okay, that's really good.
But his action of love, he wasn't afraid to demonstrate his love, but his love was different. He showed his love different than my dad. but both men were loving and both were not afraid to say, I love you in that sense.
Okay.
They could say the words, but they were different sides of the same coin, showed it differently. And my father-in-law was a little bit younger than my dad. So there was a generational thing where they were the inheritors of what that long-term masculinity was for. So pops inherited some of the stuff from my dad's generation, but they still felt comfortable. My children, I was always show them love, or for the world I care about.
Right.
And so that's what I mean as far as those type of examples.
Yeah, I love both of those examples. And I think they're both good examples of a masculine man. But I really do love that a man should be able to show affection to it, especially towards his wife and towards his children. I think intimacy like that is really, really, really important, because going back to that whole like emotional vulnerability, I think fathers should take ownership and accountability for their own mistakes with their kids. I think it's okay to talk about the things that maybe they screwed up on. I think it's okay to hug them and kiss them, and definitely do the same thing with their wives. I think those methods like really open up trust and more connection. And one of the things that I'm seeing most in men right now is a lack of connection with their spouse and their kids. And so emotional vulnerability and emotional intelligence are two of the things that I really, really concentrate on. And it does truly lead to more connection. And if you do it right, people are always afraid of, well, if I show emotional vulnerability, then I'll be seen as weak, and then my wife will not respect me anymore. If you do it right, there's no way that happens, because it really does create more intimacy.
So that's another thing also, masculinity and intimacy. Explore that for our audience, how a masculine man demonstrates intimacy.
Well, through depth in conversation, obviously physically, like that's a very, very important part of a marriage, especially. But like you said, you can also show intimacy with your children. Just creating that level of kind of rawness, being able to let your walls down and not be so in control and so feeling so powerful. Like, you shouldn't let all that go completely by any means. Letting those walls down, like I said, really does invite other people in, and then you become an emotional safe space for your wife, for your kids, so they can actually trust you to talk to you. And that's exactly what you want. Like that, it's a lack of that causes the disconnect in marriage. And like I said, that's the thing I'm seeing most these days.
Along those lines, we've also heard years ago, it used to be real men don't eat quiche. And then it was also real men don't cry. Where does this fit in those lines? If you can go into that.
There was a thing that said real men don't eat quiche.
Oh yeah. When I was younger, talking about old school, it was a book, actually. It was a book. And I want to say it was early 2000s, 2001, somewhere around there. And the conversation had been, do real men, I remember a number of the news journals and magazine articles and things. And it was this whole thing. The real men don't eat quiche was just somewhat the title point, reference point, where they were talking about what a real man is. And
Right.
It was addressing masculinity. It wasn't just a real man. The undercurrent was masculinity. And men who eat quiche are not masculine was some of the
That's so
thing.
funnie. Oh, I love
Yeah.
quiche, by the way. It's like one of my favorites.
Hey, I do too, and I'm a real man. I'll even cook a mean quiche.
Oh, nice. Nice.
But
Well, I'm gonna have to buy that book for sure. But I think, okay, it's okay for men to cry. Absolutely. Men should cry. People need to cry. I think where you go wrong is the men who, or the women for that matter, who start complaining and whining. There's a difference between crying over something that's emotionally deep and a man who is complaining and whining. I think maybe some people think that emotional vulnerability gives you the right to complain about things. I don't think we complain. We talk honestly about our feelings. That's all it is.
Mm-hmm.
About the things that give us joy and the things that give us pain and struggle and the things we're worried about, but we don't complain.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if you take that out of the definition of vulnerability, you'll be okay.
So emotional vulnerability and masculinity can be together in the same embodiment of masculinity.
I think it must be.
Good. Okay. And now that answers that question. And so then a man to have a safe space to cry. Like my dad was not a crying person, but he was affectionate. And I think maybe twice when my mom was very ill, was the time where I saw him tear, and one other time, but it didn't exclude his sensitivity that he didn't cry, because he was a person that demonstrates affection. So masculinity doesn't take away, I'm sorry, crying doesn't take away masculinity for a man. So how do men find safe spaces where they can be emotionally vulnerable with their tears? Is that with his or her, I'm sorry, is that with his wife? Is that with his mom? Is that with other men? How do you see that coming out?
I think it maybe can come out in different ways with all those people. I think the wife should be a safe space. Like she should be the person who he comes home to and rests his head on, like he's had.
Even to cry if he needs it.
He shouldn't come home and cry every day. But
wait, Jennifer, let's touch on that. So that means 3 days in a row that you're like, I love you, babe, but enough.
Yeah. There's like, let's not go overboard here. But
well, wait, you said he should come home crying every day.
No, definitely not every day.
So is every day, is there a time limit on every day? Is it like men you have about a week to get these tears out, babe, and then it's done? Or is
I think it's a pick and choose your crying battle, like type of situation. Right?
It's a good way to put it, yes.
I mean, do you really need to cry about this, or is this something you can just talk about and maybe become solution oriented together?
Very good point.
I think, but if he needs that spot, yeah, like I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think you can still maintain leadership of the family and respect, because at the end of the day, men don't necessarily, yes, they want love, but they want respect more than love. I think you can still maintain like respect and leadership while being vulnerable. I think it's a requirement. Yes, if you go too far, the women do lose attraction for the man. And so, yeah, there is a fine line, because as women, we look up to a leader. We're attracted to a leader. We look up to and are attracted to the person who is a little bit higher than us on kind of most levels. And I think, like I said, we want that we want security. We want to be seen. We want to be heard, loved, and valued. And men want respect. And I think there's a way to keep all that intact while having mutual vulnerability.
That's very valid. It does bring me into this place. Today's women tend to have, and particularly with the younger women, well, he better have money or I can't deal with him. He better have a bag or I can't deal with him. Where does that feeling fit into this masculinity?
Right. So obviously provision is one of the protection, and provision are one of the traits of masculinity in my Kingmaker code. Provision is not just financial. God does call men to be the provider of the family, but that's not black and white. That can mean so many different things. He also calls men to provide emotional safe space, to provide security, to provide protection. Provision is seen as something financial only when it's probably the smallest part of it. I think there are a ton of ways that a man can provide. He can provide leadership. He can provide learning and mentorship for his kids and other people are in his life. Like he provides in so many ways. And but yes, the Bible does call a man to provide. Like
so now does that mean a guy who's a garbage man versus a guy who is worth $20 million? So the garbage man is coming home every day, providing for his family. Is he less than the man who has more of financial assets than him?
No, because he can provide the exact same thing. He can provide a sense of security, and he can provide a direction that the family's going in. He can provide stability. He can still provide all of those things.
Oh, okay. And I know that that seems to be a thing with the younger people where women have said, well, I can get my own. And so some of the masculine traits that women are looking for in men, when that conversation's been coming up, I hear with some buddies, well, what does she need me for? And then there becomes this disconnect. So he's saying, I want to be provisional as the person you can be in love with. But if you're already feeling like you got it on your own, so how does that, where do we bridge that gap of masculinity versus femininity where he can communicate to her, I've been working 15 years. What crosses that bridge where she doesn't feel that has to be an outward statement of her independence? I got mine. What do I need you for? Where there's not an intimidation factor.
Right. I think this goes back to the whole letting go on the woman's part and into her femininity. She can still go crush it in in her professional life. She can still make money. She can still maybe make more money than he does. Who knows? But I think there are conversations that have to happen to where it's he still has to be seen that it's his job, or he will have a sense of something that's being taken from him. I think that's really important. Like, he wants it to be his job. Sure, she should bring the money in too. Like, that's fine, or not. It doesn't matter. But ultimately, I think in order for that flow and that attraction to really maintain, I think he needs to be seen and felt as the provider.
Now, where the woman has, pardon me, a larger income than he does, can he still feel like a provider?
He can do other things,
Like,
like do more around the house, um, drive himself more professionally. I think it would depend specifically on the marriage of the two individuals, but I think there would be a lot of ways to work through it. But just providing more in other ways that are not financial, you can definitely do that. Talk about you can create a legacy, traditions, work towards things for your family, be goal oriented, be direction focused. I think that's ultimately what a relationship needs. And he should be the leader of that. He should also be the spiritual leader.
and I'm glad you mentioned spiritual leader. Spiritual leader, I think, is important, whatever their faith might be. But some of the conversations have been that if a woman brings in more money than the guy, there tends to be a reduction of this feeling of security and his masculinity. Is there a conversation to be had on how to help reestablish that? Because working around the house is great. My dad and mom both taught us that men are a part of the household and so forth as well. But what is the conversation where so you're a CEO of your company that does this. And so if the man comes in and he's the garbage man and Jennifer's like, he has all those qualities, he's a good dude, but he sees you're the main breadwinner, how can he feel secure in his masculinity?
She has to let him. She has to be able to let her wall down.
How does she do that?
Well, it would have to be like an intention of her day, like kind of like love is. You don't feel love. You're not like, it's not a feeling that just like stays. It's a daily choice of certain things that make that person feel loved. So there has to be a conversation around finances. There has to be a conversation around what can you do to maintain that role of leadership for our family. Because ultimately, yes, he does have to be the 100% leader of the family in order for that to work and his masculinity not be stripped away. So I think conversation has to occur, and people don't like conversation and people don't do it. And so then there becomes a problem, and it festers and it gets swept under the rug until it's too late and they have so much resentment. They don't like each other anymore.
Mm-hmm. So a man can still lead his household and he's not the breadwinner. There's no loss of masculinity, even if she's the breadwinner.
There may be, but I think you can get around it if you communicate the right way.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not communicating, yes, he's going to feel stripped of his masculinity. Like I said, there are other ways to provide, and that is spiritually. In all these ways we've talked about, there are other ways to provide. It just depends on their specific family and their relationship, but the conversations have to occur.
It does sound to me, and what I'm getting from this too as a male, the foundation of the couple and in masculinity is spiritual, one of spiritual nature. If they both are on the same page spiritually, there seems that that might be the bridge
Yeah.
where he won't feel intimidated that she is a CEO of Jennifer LLC and he is Joe Blow garbage man. So if spirituality is the foundation of their relationship, that seems to me where that is what helps flourish a comfortability
Yeah.
of masculinity where they both can recognize that. Am I correct in that way of
Yes.
describing it?
I would say you're absolutely correct.
For sure, for sure.
It,
And
it,
then in
it's
the,
crucial that the man becomes the spiritual leader. And I don't think, I think that gives a sense of masculinity in itself that can't be stripped away. And she also has to be able to follow him though. She has to submit, she still has to submit to her husband.
and you mentioned that a little bit. So describe that because you're right. I think the term, the biblical term of wives submit to your husbands. Now, you and I both understand that doesn't mean she's subjugated and should take abuse, or that's an example of his masculinity. But I'd like if you wouldn't mind elaborate on that a little bit, that particular verse through Jennifer Yehl's words.
Yeah. So kind of like I mentioned before, I think to submit to your husband means to follow his leadership. And he's already submitted to a higher power of God and his mission and his purpose on his own. And he is leading the family to these places and these places. And his direction for the family is this. And as long as it's good, and as long as it's growth oriented, she can't go wrong by submitting. And submitting, like you said, it doesn't mean yes sir, yes, whatever you say. Like it's not that at all. She should want that. That's attractive for a man to be in that position in the family is attractive. So she wants to follow a man who's mission oriented, growth oriented, and will take the family to better places, whether he's the breadwinner or not. That's his job.
I like the idea that it's based in that way. I think that's where some of the pieces we should be talking more about, that masculinity is more so solidly based in a spiritual foundation. I think that's a big part of that. And based on a lot of the principles that you spoke about, I find like that's a good place where we can say, yes, we meet on this bridge of spiritual connection.
Absolutely. I think, like I said, whether you are Christian or not, I think belief in a higher power is really, really important to anybody. I don't know how you do it without belief in a higher power. I feel like you'll always feel like you're missing something. And so a spiritually oriented relationship is extremely important for the longevity and health of it. Whatever that higher power is.
Jennifer, is it just in your organization? Do you just work with corporate men, or is it the layman who is out a garbage man or a teacher and so forth? Any men from any profession can come to your company and
every man
seek support.
Yeah, I've even worked with a couple of 21-year-olds, which was really interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be very fascinated by that. So because I would think at 21 years old, you're still somewhat in the self-discovery of what masculinity is for you as a young man. So how does that look? A 21-year-old comes to you and says, give me guidance.
Yeah, it's actually very fascinating. It was I would say that's one of my most favorite groups to work with, even though I don't typically do that. It's mostly the, 35 to 65-year-old business-oriented guy. But the young men who are still discovering who they are, I mean, their prefrontal cortex isn't even fully developed yet. They are fascinating. They actually want to find their purpose this early in life. They want to have good dating situations where they take leadership. And so to talk about that with somebody who's still fresh with and not tainted by so much of the world yet is really, really magical.
It really is. Jennifer, you and your organization fit in with Makerspire in creating 1 million leaders today for tomorrow in a number of different ways, but in particular with the focus here on rediscovering and/or kingmaking, redefining masculinity. So along those lines, what is the piece of advice in young boys who are up and coming in creating that leadership? It sounds to me that along with the spiritual foundation, a young boy finding his purpose is on the right journey to finding out where his masculinity is. Am I also understanding that correctly?
Absolutely. And obviously, purpose evolves over time, but you have to start somewhere and keep making it evolve. So, to find those things that give him passion, that maybe he can turn his stories into something of value for other people, that he can work into his professional life, something. But a man's purpose should be the most important thing in his life, except for your spiritual beliefs. And so continuously following that should be the most important thing that you do, especially as a young man. And that will just drive you and make you more open to the opportunities that God or the universe wants to put into your life, to where maybe if you weren't so focused on purpose, you wouldn't see those opportunities as avenues to more.
That's absolutely a great place. Jennifer, your organization, how can people reach out and contact you to learn more about it, in particular men? Where can they go?
You can find me on LinkedIn. That's my main place of business, at my name, Jennifer Jehl. You can find all about me, exactly the services I offer. And I write all the time. Writing is my favorite thing to do. So there is a ton of information that I've written that you could take a look at. Yeah, so find me there, and I would love to talk to you.
Jennifer, I said pre this interview, I'd like us to continue on this topic at several points in the future as well, because I think it is an evolving and continuously engaging conversation that should be had. I think our times are ripe with these questions on masculinity and femininity. And I think we haven't even gone into some of the transgendered portions of that and some of the other controversial issues that surround masculinity and its what is it, its definition, and redefining that. So I hope that you would be welcomed to feel welcome to come back on my program, and we can go over some of those in the near future.
Absolutely. I would love to talk about, I like controversial subjects. And I think also we could have touched a whole lot more on the woman's side of this whole story. There were a couple points I kind of feel like we should have gone, a certain way, but I know we don't have a ton of time. So I think there's a lot more we could talk about.
Jennifer, I appreciate your candidness in saying that. I would like to, because I do want to examine all those. And please, I beg your pardon that we hadn't gone that direction. I think the controversy of masculinity in the term was where I was staying on that road. So I would like to have you back on very soon, because I do think that's extremely valid as well. I definitely agree with you that we could have gone down it. I would like to have you back on in a short period of time. Does that sound okay?
That would be absolutely wonderful.
I would certainly welcome it. And please, again, I beg your pardon, because I think this conversation, I wasn't sure of your time, but this broadcast was timed for an hour or so. So I would like to be able to do that, because it's actually very much a valid point. So part 2 is going to be very soon. What's your time look like? Let's look at that so we can get to do that in the next few weeks.
Absolutely. I'm down for it whenever you want.
I really like that. Jennifer, you have been absolutely amazing. And this topic is extremely important to me. I have sons, and I definitely have really been very much enthralled by this particular conversation, because my generation, we were the inheritors of how the communication masculinity was changing. And so with that, the feminine portion of that, I think all of that can be something that continues to engage other people in discovering what your thoughts are about this. So let's look forward to creating that scheduled time.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. I'm excited.
I am too. Jennifer, you have been an extremely incredible, interesting guest in this topic in itself. And I thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a wonderful conversation.
It really was, Jennifer. It just really was. I didn't expect that some of the laughter would come there, but I got to tell you, it just was a sheer pleasure. It really was a sheer pleasure. And I, hands down, really mean we'll get on the map to be able to do part 2. And we'll focus just on the feminine mystique, actually, which I think is actually a good place to leave that topic on, because that in itself was a feminism book that challenged some of the terms of masculinity. So we'll pick it up from that point.
Okay. That sounds great. I look forward to it.
Absolutely. Jennifer Jehl, thank you so much. Makers Bar audience, we thank Jennifer for being with us today. Again, today you've heard the first part, and what I hope to continue to be conversations about masculinity and what that means with our incredible guest, Jennifer Jehl. Let's continue to have an open dialogue with us, brothers. Let's also continue to have an open dialogue with the sisters of all races, all religions. Let's examine masculinity. I think it's time where men, and this particular point of conversation is needed for us as a society to completely grow into more of where we're supposed to be, our higher selves. The revolution that we all want is a love-evolution. We're looking forward to a revolution of love. You all take good care of each other. And Jennifer, thank you so much for being here. We're looking forward to you being on Maker's Bar with Seth Guru Baxter again. Please do take care, and we wish you all the best. I just thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. God bless.
God bless. Thank you, Jennifer.